The church was started by Brother Philip Jenkins, who was born in Maryland in November 1841. The 1890 census shows Brother Jenkins still living in Portland at age 48. He lived and worked on the west side of the Willamette River in what is now called Northwest Portland. Brother Jenkins saw the need for an African Methodist Episcopal Church to be organized in Portland. Starting in 1889, he and a small group of Christians met at his home on Northwest Johnson. They continued meeting at Brother Jenkins' home for a few years until the group could get their Christian endeavor realized into the African Methodist Episcopal Church connection. Between 1892 and 1897 or 98, the church had 4 name changes. First, it was African Methodist Church. Second, it was Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Mission Church. Third was People's African Methodist Episcopal Church. And finally, Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. From 1892 to 1915, Bethel's congregation worshiped on the west side of the Willamette River, first on 6th Street and Stark, then on 13th and Gleason, and then 10th between Davis and Everett. Between 1892 and 1897, at least 5 reverends served Bethel as pastor. Then, in 1897, Reverend Shepherd S. Freeman was appointed. Reverend Freeman and Brother Jenkins eventually had a falling out, and Brother Jenkins padlocked the church, forcing Reverend Freeman to find a new location. In the 1890s, jobs on the railroad and at the Portland Hotel brought many African Americans to Portland. Many of Bethel's members settled around Union Station, and railroad men stayed overnight at the Golden West Hotel and boarding houses. In order to support his ministry, Reverend Freeman and his wife Lenora decided to operate a boarding house. It was located between 3rd and 4th on Everett Street. Women from the congregation helped serve the public, and the whole African American community rallied to support the business. The successful venture enabled the Freemans to purchase an old Japanese mission building on 10th Street between Everett and Davis for Bethel AME Church. They also purchased the house next door for themselves and for future pastors, and they were located there from 1898 to 1915 or 16. In the 1890s, the northwest area near Union Station was predominantly Asian and African American. There were Chinese and Japanese businesses and residences in the same area that most African Americans also lived and had businesses. In fact, the church was located in the heart of the area that was then called Japantown. In 1911, Reverend James Craw was appointed to Bethel. During that time, the African American church served as the social life of the African American community. In 1912, the combined Sunday school classes of Bethel AME, First AME Zion, and Mount Olivet Baptist churches held a Sunday school picnic for its children. Due to a growing commercial redevelopment of the Union Station area, this was the first time Bethel was forced to move. As early as 1912, Bethel's building fund was established to raise funds for the next location. This document shows Reverend Craw granting authority to Mrs. W. M. Rutherford to solicit funds to build New Bethel on the other side of the river. In 1915 or 16, Bethel AME Church purchased property on the east side of the river in inner North Portland, on the corner of North Larrabee and McMillan Streets. They built a basement or first floor during that time. This is where they worshiped and held events. The second floor sanctuary was added in 1922. They built a beautiful brick church. In this area is where Memorial Coliseum sits today. The house next to the church was bought by Bethel for its pastor. It is unknown whether the house was built during the church's construction or whether it already existed while the church was being built. The structure in the middle is the house next to the church. The move to the new location was a memorable day in the history of the church and in the history of Portland's African American churches, the first time an African American congregation had built its own church. Bethel's congregation continued to grow and worshiped at this site for over 40 years until redevelopment forced them to move again. During those 40-plus years, from 1915 to 1958, Bethel had at least 13 more appointed pastors. About the 9th appointed pastor since 1915 was Reverend Browning Allen, who served as Bethel's pastor from 1939 to 1944. In 1940, there were around 2,000 African Americans in Portland, but World War II and work in the shipyards brought another 15,000 African Americans to the Portland area. Things changed considerably as a result. Reverend Allen did extensive outreach to African American men and women in the service, as well as to the newly arrived African Americans living in Vanport City, Giles Lake, and other housing projects built expressly for the new arrival. After several more pastors were appointed and gone, Reverend Harley Akers was appointed from 1954 to 1962 to Bethel as pastor. Reverend Akers organized the Young Matrons Club. In September of 1957, Old Bethel was displaced by the Memorial Coliseum. The city of Portland purchased Old Bethel for $75,000, and the congregation built another church at the estimated cost of $134,000 on Northeast 8th Avenue. Here you can see the purchase contract for Old Bethel. Minnie Bell Johnson, shown here, is one of the signers on this contract. She's the last living trustee on the contract. Being forced to move in February of 1958, before the new church was finished, the church held choir practice at St. Philip the Deacon Episcopal Church and worshiped temporarily at the old Elliott School, located at Knott and Rodney. This building was later named Knott Street Community Center, and then was replaced by a new building that is now named Matt Dishman Community Center. When the city displaced the church, it also displaced the church's parsonage. Bethel members bought a new parsonage for the Akers family on Northeast 10th Avenue in the Irvington neighborhood. Not only was Old Bethel destroyed, the African American community was destroyed as well by construction of Interstate 5, the Memorial Coliseum, and by a plan to expand Emmanuel Hospital. This is what the corner of Williams Avenue and Russell Street looked like when Bethel worshiped a block away at the Knott Street Community Center. From 1962 to 1969, Reverend Grady Brown was appointed as Bethel's pastor. Reverend Brown purchased additional vacant land across from the new Bethel, and he retired the second mortgage on the church. From 1969 to 1976, Reverend A. Lee Henderson served as pastor. During this time, Bethel's Head Start program was established, the church's first mortgage was retired, and a second piece of property across the street from New Bethel was purchased. 3 pastors were appointed to serve Bethel from 1976 to 1991. Reverend L. Fisher Hines, Reverend Matthew A. Watley, and Reverend Milton Green. From 1991 to 1998, Reverend Dorsey McCullough was appointed as pastor of Bethel. Reverend McCullough made several improvements to the church and its grounds. With the sale of the parsonage on Northeast 10th Avenue, a new parsonage was purchased. 2 pastors were appointed to serve Bethel from 1998 to 2009, Reverend Ronald L. Williams and Reverend Robert L. Ned. In November 2009, the first woman to be appointed pastor of Bethel arrived, Reverend Donna Maria David. Currently, Reverend Arthur B. Carter, Jr. serves as Bethel's pastor. He was appointed in 2012 and has worked diligently to grow Bethel's membership. At least 35 pastors have served Bethel AME Church's congregation over the past 124 years. We've only highlighted those pastors who purchased and built the 3 churches and 4 parsonages that Bethel has owned. However, every pastor has worked to instill spiritual growth and to maintain the facilities that housed the congregation. Without all of their tireless efforts, Bethel would not have survived and thrived. We owe every pastor a debt of appreciation and thank God for sending each of them to Bethel. We've come this far by faith.